Dear friends, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to one more open lecture with one more interesting subject and a great speaker. If I remember well, I met our speaker in 2014 in the centenary of the Irish Lodge of Research. Then I met him many times in various places, such as in Toulon and Bordeaux, and I had the honor also to welcome him 3 times in Athens for the Philotecton Society's activities. Our speaker lives in the northeast corner of Ireland, where he joined the Masonic Order in 1977. He became a Master Mason and served as Master of his mother lodge. He joined the Irish Lodge of Research as a correspondence circle member in 1982 and presented his first Masonic research paper to the Lodge in 1984. In 1996, he was appointed Grand Master's Standard Bearer, and in the year 2000, he became the Millennium Master of the Irish Lodge of Research, number 200. In 2001, went on to become Excellent King of the Irish Chapter of Research, number 222. He is the current Secretary of the Irish Lodge of Research since 2015, having served some 24 years as editor of the Lodge Transactions. He held office in the Provincial Grand Lodge of Antrim as the Grand Librarian for the province of Antrim and curator of the museum at their headquarters in Belfast, until the museum was finally closed in 2018 on the sale of the Rosemary Street building. Since that time, he has been one of the leading voices seeking to influence the province into refunding and opening a museum and library elsewhere within the Masonic province of Antrim. He has been active in the field of Masonic research, writing and presenting many articles and papers. In past years, he has spoken in research groups, including the constitution of the Friedrich Munter Research Lodge in Copenhagen, at several symposia organized by Lodge Hope of Kurrachee in the Masonic province of Fife and Kinross in Scotland, and the Manchester Association of Masonic Research, which all came on top of a heavy schedule of lodge presentations throughout Ireland. In October 2010, he received an invitation to participate in a worldwide lecture series endorsed by the Grand Lodge of Indiana. More recently, he has presented several Zoom presentations over the last couple of years. Dear friends, with great pleasure, I present to you Right Worshipful Brother Bob Bashford. Bob, the floor is yours, and we are looking forward to your lecture on early development of Irish Freemasonry.
Thank you very much for that warm and supportive introduction, Dimitrios. And I'll just get set up here and we'll get kicked off.
Bu arada muhteşem hayvanlarına bir daha bakmak ve son 50 yılda etrafın nasıl değiştiğini görmek için Madagaskar.
And this evening, firstly, good evening, brethren and friends, and thank you all for giving up your Sunday evening to come along and share with us in presentation number 21, when I have the great honor to tell you a little bit about the early development of Irish Freemasonry. Now, for those that maybe don't know a lot about the Grand Lodge of Ireland, the Grand Lodge of Ireland is the ruling body of Irish Freemasons and is based in our administrative headquarters down in Mulder Street in Dublin. Here we have our Grand Master, Most Worshipful Brother Douglas Gray, and his deputy and assistants. Under Grand Lodge are a number of provincial Grand Lodges, each responsible for their own province. And you may be interested to know that currently there are 14 provinces within the island of Ireland itself. And then we have a number of provincial provinces in New Zealand, South Africa, Northern, Southern Cape provinces, Natal, Ireland and India, Zambia, Bermuda, the Far East, Bahamas, Sri Lanka, and Southeast Asia. Our membership comprises men of all ages, races, colors, religion, political.
Bob, excuse me. Could you please put your presentation in a full screen?
Yeah, hang on.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
You're fine.
Not yet.
Everything but.
Yeah, slideshow. And no. It's up and right or left? Left. From current slide. Yes, from current slide is on the left side. It's in the corner.
Disable, hide.
Says
optimized.
No. Slideshow.
Yes.
Slideshow as you did it before. And
yes.
then from current slide. Yes.
Yep. Ah, yes, there we are.
Oh yeah, perfect. Thank you.
The marvel of technology.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry for the interruption.
No, you're fine. You're always better keeping me right. We're talking about membership, and our membership comprises men of all ages, race, color, religion, political belief, and financial or social standing. And our midst we have employed brethren, self-employed brethren, unemployed brethren, and retired brethren. Some from the professions, trades, skills, arts, sciences, business, and manual occupations. Now, there are many things that attract people to join. For example, the good report of their friends and neighbours. The desire to become involved in our charity work, a need for the fellowship and companionship of others as we get older, and we have a bit more spare time. And of course, curiosity to learn more about the various aspects of Freemasonry. Some may even investigate that famous claim that Freemasonry will help you become a more rounded and better person. Now, here in Ireland, we have one important rule that applies to all Irish Freemasons, and that there will be no discussion on politics or religion, either at our meetings or festive boards, to preserve the peace, love, and harmony within our lodges. Now, Freemasonry helps to give its members self-confidence as they engage in their various duties throughout their Masonic career in their lodges, as they fill their various offices, and it teaches them, by example, one of the arts of public speaking. One aspect of Freemasonry in Ireland is our Masonic Charities. And interestingly enough, a lot of people seem to think Masonic Charities are a new idea. And as you can see from this particular old panel from a lodge room in Donaghadee in County Down from 1821, we help the poor in the time of need, the naked clothe, the hungry feed. That is as applicable today with all the happenings in the world at the present time as it was back in 1821. Now, we have a number of established Masonic and non-Masonic charities which we work together to raise funds and provide help where needed. We have separate funds to support the daughters and sons of deceased members of Masonic Order. We have various widows funds to support the widows of deceased brethren. And through the Masonic Havens, we can provide a limited number of sheltered housing units for the use of our elderly in Virginia, County Cavan, and in Dublin. However, in the last 2 years, like most other Grand Lodges, Our lodges and our local Belfast Brothers and Charity Fund have been very visible in their support to the population throughout the structures of the COVID epidemic. They provided food, parcels and shopping for the elderly. They set up a process of going to collect prescriptions and delivering them to the door as required. And they also provided PPE to old people's homes, single mothers accommodation, and other groups as required. After all, we in Freemasonry consider ourselves to be a part of society, and not as some of our outsiders seem to think, as apart from society. When you apply for membership of a lodge, your application is made to a particular lodge, and if accepted, will be sent on to the local committee of inspection, where a group of local lodges meet to consider and approve membership. You will then be invited along on a particular evening to the lodge, where you will receive the first of your 3 craft degrees. Friends, all I can tell you is that my late father-in-law encouraged me to join a small local lodge in Mayargat outside Ballycastle in 1977. And since then, my Masonic journey has taken me to Denmark, Washington, Athens, Bordeaux, London, Edinburgh, and throughout the island of Ireland. And as a result, I have become a firm believer in the benefits of lodge membership for the development and growth of individual character within the Grand Lodge of Ireland. Now, as most of you know, we in Ireland have a great tradition of stone construction going back some 5,200 years to the construction of Newgrange, the oldest stone building in the world, some 1,000 years older than Stonehenge and the pyramids of Egypt. Now, Masonically speaking, our earliest surviving Masonic artifact yet found is the Ballsbridge Square, found in the northeast corner of the foundations of the Balls Bridge when it was been demolished over the Shannon in Limerick in the 1830s. Engraved on the face of the square is the date 1507, and the following Masonic inscription: "I will strive to live with love and care upon the level by the square." This important Irish artifact is still preserved in the museum attached to the lodge rooms in St. John's Masonic Centre down in Limerick. It sits in that historic St. John's Castle precinct in the centre of Limerick, and if you ever get an opportunity, it's well worth taking the opportunity to visit it. In a similar vein, in the year 1912, the brethren in Enniskillen record the discovery of a small bog oak medallion located in the ruins of an old cottage just outside the village of Dromore in County Tyrone. The discovery appears to have been well documented at the time, with a number of statements from local brethren in Frillick, Lisnahanna and Enniskillen, and with a further documented report by the Deputy Provincial Grand Master of Tyrone and Fermanagh. This medallion, bearing the date 1517, is covered on both sides with Masonic symbols and a series of random letters. Today it remains in the safekeeping of the brethren in Enniskillen, where it sits quietly and generally unobserved in the cabinet of Masonic Curiosities held in the Masonic Hall in Enniskillen. And again, sitting quietly in St. Nicholas's Church of Ireland Church in Carrickfergus is one of the oldest surviving Masonic chairs in Ireland. This particular chair bears the date 1685 and has the carved figure of Hibernia with the compasses and square, emblematic of its early Masonic connections. There are 2 sets of initials on this old chair, AJR, KCB, which may refer to the original owners of the chair, but sadly, if this is the case, these records have been lost in the mist of time. Now, down along the side of Loch Ney, in the old graveyard at Shane's Castle, sits an old Masonic gravestone recording the burial place of John Frew, and being the date 1684. And as you can see, you have the compasses and square at the top of the headstone. Now, interestingly enough, John Frew was not a stonemason. He was a small local farmer And the suggestion of the square and compass would suggest possibly that he had some Masonic interests at that early time. And this takes us then to the Trinity College Library. And Trinity College Library records still survive of a 1688 student's tripos, a harangue prepared in Latin by one of the candidates' bachelors, which pokes fun at university life at the time. Of particular interest to us today are the references to the Order of Freemasonry, its speculative membership, and the fact that at that time there appears to have been two varieties available, the old and the new way. Now, this may well be a reference to evolution from operative to speculative masonry, or indeed may even refer to the ongoing political scene at the time leading up to the Glorious Revolution in 1690. Either way, it is an important affirmation of the long establishment of Freemasonry in one of our oldest Irish universities. It's quite clearly it would be pointless to poke fun at an organization that no one else had ever heard of. The very existence of the tripos clearly shows us that Freemasonry was well known in the city at that time. Now, in Ireland, we've only ever had one lady Freemason. The story is the Lady Elizabeth Aldworth, who inadvertently observed some ongoing degree work in the Lodge meeting in her father's house, which led to her being discovered in the library and eventually in her receiving the Fellowcraft degree, and led to a lifetime's involvement in Irish Freemasonry. Her portrait, jewel, apron, and indeed chair are still preserved in the small but select Masonic collections preserved in the Tuckey Street Hall in the city of Cork. Now, on the floor in the centre of St. Finbarr's Cathedral in Cork is the brass memorial plaque erected by the Freemasons of Munster to preserve her memory for posterity. Now, current thinking would suggest the formation of the Grand Lodge of Ireland in and around the year 1723. All I can currently say with certainty is that a notice was published in the Dublin Weekly Journal, issue 13, dated the 26th of June, 1725, clearly showing that the Grand Lodge of Ireland was clearly in existence. And on St. John's Day, the 24th of June, 1725, they installed their next Grand Master, the Earl of Ross. And interestingly, unlike the practice adopted in Westminster, all of our Grand Officers, with the exception of the Deputy Grand Master, were appointed by Grand Lodge and not by the Grand Master, as has always been the case in Westminster and more recently in Ugly. Our role in the structure of Irish Freemasonry was envisaged by one of our greatest and earliest Grand Secretaries, Worshipful Brother John Pennell, who established the use of Lodge warrants in Ireland and produced our very first book of constitutions in 1730. He foresaw Freemasonry in general, and we in particular in the Lodge Research, forming a centre of union for those who would otherwise remain at a perpetual distance. Of course, there are some who would suggest the past is dead, that the dead bury their dead. But as you all know only too well, we are the heirs of our predecessors, and it is our duty to pass on to our successors the rich historical inheritance that we enjoy without deterioration. And here in Pennell's Constitution, we find those first steps been taken by the Irish Constitution to establish the proper framework for the organised and structured growth of Freemasonry worldwide. The Irish Constitution in 1731 was the first to issue warrants. That document used as a visual indication that Lodge meetings were perfect, just, and regular. Pardon me. It would be a further 20 years before the Grand Lodge of the Ancients under Dermot followed suit. A further 16 years had passed before the moderns finally adopted the practice, And since then, every regular constitution around the globe issues warrants to their constituent lodges as proof of their regularity. Currently, we only know of 3 surviving examples of the 1731. Lodge 1, which is shown on our picture, preserved in the Tuckey Street Museum in Cork. Lodge 2, kept in Moulder Street in Dublin. And Lodge 7, which until recently was preserved in the Masonic collections in Rosemary Street. Now, in the 18th century and into the early 19th century, the blue or craft warrant was the only document available to Irish lodges registered with the Grand Lodge of Ireland. In those days, masters were appointed for a 6-month period from St. John's Day to St. John's Day. These were the 2 major days in Irish Freemasonry, and when lodges met early on the morning of St. John's Day, they installed their new officers for the next 6-month period, and they got prepared and marched off to the local church for their St. John's Day Divine Service. This entailed a walk out to the selected church venue, which could be several miles away, for their church service, and then the return walk to their lodge room once the service was over. The lodges walked in numerical order, with the host lodge being the last lodge into the church. The lodges on some occasions would have had a lambeg drum and a fife to establish their marching rhythm. And some lodges carried banners with many different Masonic symbols thereon, representative of the many other degrees available under their craft warrant. This particular example from Temple of Fame Lodge number 46 and down shows symbols from the Craft Lodge, the Royal Arch Chapter, and the early Grand Encampment at that time. Now, alternatively, some lodges did not have a banner, pardon me, but kept a board in their lodge room with various symbols that acted as a prompt for their degree giver. Now, this is an interesting one because we in Ireland do not use tracing boards, that popular invention used by the English to teach their candidates about ritual. In Ireland, the floor cloth or wall chart is only used by the lecturer himself as an aid memoir for him as he gives the various degrees. Now, on the screen, we have one most interesting example, which resides in the Strayed Masonic Hall and used by the Brethren of Lodge 276, with mostly the same symbols as other such boards, floor cloths, and banners. And as you inspect this one, some of you may actually notice one unique symbol that tells us this board was painted in the year 1817. And I'll give you a wee minute there to have a look at the board and see if anything strikes your eyes. 1817 in Ireland was the year of the Great Comet, which was visible over the north of Ireland for some 7 months in 1817. And if you look closely at the sun, moon, and 7 stars, you'll see that, in fact, there's 6 stars and 1 comet. You may also be interested to learn that whenever we informed the Brethren and Strayed that this was the case, they were able to go back into their old surviving minute books, and they found an entry for 1817 for the payment of £1, 3 and 6pence to a Mr. John Smith for painting their floor cloth. So clearly, the floor cloth tied in well with what was actually happening externally on the North Ireland at that particular time. Now, we have previously made passing references to Royal Arch Masonry, and at this point I would like to draw your attention to its earliest history in Ireland. We find first mention of the arch in Pennell's 1730 volume of Constitutions. Here we find the well-known phrase, "And that the cement of the brotherhood be so well preserved that the whole body may remain as a well-built arch." Now, this statement has to be considered in conjunction with the frontispiece used by Pennell, and indeed similar in some ways to Anderson's frontispiece, which shows the Grand Master standing beneath an arch with a vista of columns supporting the Masonic edifice, terminating in a well-built arch, ornamented with an unmistakable keystone. It was Pennell who also exhorted the brethren to quit themselves like men, walk by the line, stand by the plumb, live upon the square, and level their friendships to the end of time. And that while here they build to themselves and dwell in earthly tabernacles, they will make sure of everlasting habitation not made with hands. Now, in my view, this choice of wording with an associated symbolism was quite deliberate in the case of Pennell, and that he was laying out a clear road mark for those in the know, pointing them to the goal of a well-built arch. Now, interesting enough, in an old cupboard in the Coleraine Masonic Hall can be found the original colours and silver officers' jewels, which used to be worn by the officers of the Vernon Lodge number 123 Coleraine. These jewels were the gift of Dominic Hyland, first master of the lodge, a little bit earlier, on the 8th of May 1741. Warrant number 123 was issued by the Grand Lodge of Ireland to William Kincaid, Gent, Alexander McCracken, Gent, and Dominic Hyland, Gent, to hold the lodge in Coleraine in the county of Londonderry. This would appear to have been a pre-existing time immemorial lodge, which was regularising its position in response to a press advertisement in Falconer's Dublin Journal of 1st of July 1740. When Grand Lodge called on all time immemorial lodges to apply for warrants, or they would be proceeded against as rebel Masons. Now, these officers' jewels, as you can see, are unique. They carry the craft symbolism on the obverse face, and as shown here, the Royal Arch symbols on the reverse. Each jewel bears the name Dominic Hyland and the date 1747. They're all magnificent 18th century Georgian silver jewels with well engraved with Masonic symbols and bearing the name Vernon Lodge and the date 1747. These have various motifs on Masonic motifs on the jewel, and they are all record the fact that they were the gift of our worthy brother Dominic Hyland. This particular example is the Master's jewel, and here is the Senior Warden's jewel, and there's another Junior Warden's jewel which we haven't illustrated tonight. On the three corners, you will see the specific Royal Arch symbols, the sun, the snake, the pickaxe, and in the center, a Holy Royal Arch set up over an altar in the Holy of Holies. The arch comprises 4 separate courses with a keystone on top. And we've already looked at the Horseman Master jewel as a unique and beautiful silver square suspended from the center and bearing engraved representations of the compass, the square, and volume of the law on one side, and the sun, moon, and Master's gavel on the other. Suspended under the square, supported in 3 short lengths of silver chains, a finely wrought equilateral triangle, bearing on one face the All Seeing Eye, the 47th proposition, and on the other, you can see the Royal Arch symbolism similar to what we have here on the Senior Warden's jewel. These jewels, you will probably be surprised to learn, are still in use today. They are totally unique and by far the earliest officer's jewel of the Royal Arch chapter that exists anywhere in the world. Now, a few miles down the road in the town of Enniskillen is a magnificent floor cloth that has been framed and preserved on the wall behind the Senior Warden's chair. This magnificent artifact was produced in 1749 for the Constitution of Masonic Lodge number 205 attached to the 35th Regiment of Foot. The regiment was stationed at Charlemont Fort, which lies on the River Blackwater opposite the town of Moy in County Armagh. If I may, I would like to remind you all of the importance of this particular relic, dating from the year 1749, as the central design on the floor cloth has the Worshipful Master in his blue cloak, sitting on the master's throne, facing a figure in a red cloak, wearing a red apron with an arch containing a Holy of Holies under the keystone. Over the head of the figure are drawn 3 golden crowns, emblematic of the Trinity, the 3 Grand Masters, and the 3 kings who clearly ruled the chapter at that time. Beside the 3 crowns is a bishop's mitre, emblematic of the high priest, another very important officer of the chapter. Some telling text is found written on the top of the floor cloth, which reads as follows: "Our wondrous arch is yonder vaulted sky, our mighty keystone is the all-seeing eye." Now, we need only go to the United States and observe their enthusiasm for Royal Arch records from the 1760s onwards. And yet here in Ireland, we have well-preserved Masonic artifacts from the very earliest Royal Arch workings. And at this point, I would like to remind you that these degrees were an integral part of craft masonry in the 18th century. There were no separate Royal Arch warrants in Ireland at that time. And in fact, it would not be until the end of the Scream Brown Royal Arch chapter would not be formed until the 1830s. So it's an interesting view of where we were and what was happening. I'll give you a final look at it and the symbolism that's on it, and then move forward. Coming a wee bit further forward, one of the very few public memorials that can be seen in the north of Ireland is in Temple Corran Graveyard in Ballycarry. And it's sacred to the memory of Brother James Orr, Secretary of Masonic Lodge 1014, based on the first floor of Miller's Inn in Ballycarry, a building and pub which is still in existence to the current time. And Orr was a man famous in his own right as a weaver poet, the Bard of Ballycarry. His best known poem for most people is the poem he had written after the 1798 rebellion when he had to go to America. And the first couple of verses go a bit like this: "The savage loves his native shore, to rid the soil and chill the air. Well, then may errant sons adore their isle which nature forms so fair. What floor reflects a shore so sweet, a Shannon great or pastoral ban, or where a friend or foe can meet, so generous as an Irishman." Now, Orr's work is considered by modern poets such as Seamus Heaney as being one on equal standing with the better known Robbie Orr. As I said there a minute ago, Robbie Burns, Orr himself was involved in the 1798 rebellion, and as a consequence had to flee to America for a couple of years before he was able to safely return home to Ballycarry. Many Irishmen over the years travelled the world, and I would just like to take a couple of moments and talk about one such unusual Irish artifact. One well-known Belfast tea company owned a number of tea plantations on the island of Ceylon in the 19th century. It sent a number of managers out from Belfast to look after these plantations, and in their midst was one industrious individual gentleman who spent his spare time collecting beetles, pupa, insects, butterflies, etc., and then used them to produce a curious Masonic chart. And if you look closely at this picture, you will see that all of the Masonic symbols are made up of insects, pupa, and the like. This particular example was preserved in the Rosemary Street Masonic Museum, and there's one other larger example down in one of the lodges in County Armagh. But to the best of my knowledge, they are the only two of their kind that I am aware of anywhere in the Masonic world. Now, our final piece this evening is a modern version of the 1868 Masonic pattern Balik dinner service, designed and produced by Balik under the guidance of their Masonic manager, Mr. John Armstrong. Now, with some difficulty, we in the Irish Lodge of Research eventually got permission from Balik Pottery to reuse their design as part of a centenary plate produced in 2014 to mark the centenary of the Irish Lodge of Research. Friends, we've only briefly touched on the many surviving artifacts confirming the age and history of the Grand Lodge of Ireland, the oldest continuously working Grand Lodge in the world. Irish warrants accompanied many of the British Army regiments on their travels around the world, and as a consequence, were one of the main sources of regularity sought out by lodges on their formation around the globe. There's so much more to this story yet to be told. I thank you all for the way you've received this brief presentation and hope that you all will find some aspects of interest within. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Brother Bob, for this presentation, and with all those rare and unique artifacts from the early history of Grand Lodge of Ireland. Could you please stop sharing the screen just to see on each other?
There we are.
And I can pass the floor to everyone who simply use chat box or raise hand for questions and comments. And thank you very much for this fascinating presentation. Brother Hugh O'Neill, I think you have raised your hand before. No.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I
Oh,
did.
yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Sorry,
Okay.
I've
Please.
just seen your unmute thingy there. Now, Bob, yes, that's a very, very interesting talk that you've given there on the history of Freemasonry in Ireland, and probably one of the oldest organizations that there is. There was a thing you mentioned about the to support your argument about the Ballsbridge Square. Well, I've seen that square, but I would draw your attention to a paper in AQC volume 126 by John Acaster. He was quite an expert on, should I say, printing styles of characters, and so on down the centuries. His analysis of the style of the digits of the date of 1507 there, and he gives examples, is that date is in the style of the late 17th century, probably the last couple of decades of the 1600s, and not before. The style of those characters is not earlier than, as I say, the last couple of decades of the 17th century. And that style went on until perhaps the end of the first quarter of the 18th century. So almost certainly that square is not of the age indicated by that date. You might like to have a look at that AQC volume 126, and you will find a full detailed analysis of that. And you may, once you've done that, you may have some comments to make.
As you may or may not know, I was a very good friend of John Acaster's.
Okay.
And John and I have debated this very point while he was still with us. Sadly, he's no longer with us, but him and I took different views on that particular item.
Okay.
I can understand John had a reluctance to accept anything from Ireland that left it earlier than England, and I can fully understand that argument. But at the end of the day, it was found in the foundation whenever they demolished the old Balls Bridge. And probably to put the picture right for you, if you think in terms of London Bridge with all the buildings on the bridge, that was the way the old Balls Bridge was. And the square was recovered in 1830, went to a very senior mason in Limerick at that time, and has appeared in a number of volumes of QC and a number of other places as well over the years. John is only the latest and a long number of commenters for and against the argument over the validity of the square.
Yes, as you say, there can be different opinions. However, he did give some examples of that style of printing, and I think that seals it. The seniority of the researchers really doesn't have too much bearing, but the quality of the analytical work, certainly for me, holds much more weight.
Well, as you may well be aware, Hugh, I presented a longer extended version of this paper to QC back in 2017, and John at that time didn't raise any questions about the square.
Well, it wasn't until after that that he did so. So anyway, there we are. We have a little difference there, but a jolly good talk that you've just given there, and certainly a lot of very interesting points and matters to consider. Yes, certainly the Royal Arch being part and parcel of what you were doing is probably how that came to be here with our ancients Grand Lodge, and regarded as part and parcel of their work as a fourth degree. Another small point I'd like to ask is on the illustrations of the what one would call tracing boards. There doesn't seem to be any indications about the mark degree, and that is certainly now, and probably was then, part and parcel of the whole gamut, right through from the craft to the Royal Arch. Do you have a comment about that?
There are a wide variety of boards. All I would say, really, that particular example from Strade and County Antrim is quite specific in the aspects that it shows. The mark, as you know, was once practiced in Ireland, then it died out for a while, then John Fowler brought it in back from America. He brought the Americanized version of Irish working back to Ireland and reintroduced it. It appears in a few of the boards, but not in that many of them. And the mark seems to have been something which we went, basically the excellent, super excellent Royal Arch, and the mark seems to have fallen between the stools in a lot of our, particularly our country lodges. I'm not sure if you quite grasped what I had said earlier. Boards in Ireland as
no, I know you don't. I know you don't.
A tracing board is something that you have and you talk to your candidate about. Our banners, our wall charts, our floor cloths are basically only there as an aid memoir to remind the lecturer what he's talking about and where it is. And if you look at the makeup of those, you'll find that there's a wealth of different degrees illustrated there. And he's only using, he picks out what he needs for the particular degree he's given at the time.
Yes, well, I mean, that was the original purpose, wasn't it, of the boards, to be as an aid memoir for the lectures or whatever they were doing and so on. Yes, I noticed that practically all over Ireland, where you do come across those, they're usually hanging in the robing room or somewhere like that, or around the dining hall.
And interestingly, Hugh, what you'll find, and a man like me, a name like your own will know as well as I do, Ireland is very much a Celtic country. We are a verbal country. We
I know that,
talk our way through it. Most of the boards that you see hanging up in lodge rooms throughout Ireland are invariably gifts from the traveling military lodges that come in from England or wherever, and they would present them when their members were being brought into a lodge and greeted and welcomed into the various lodges throughout Ireland. And so far over the last 30 years, I've never yet managed to find any particularly unique Irish boards amongst them. There's a very modern set of boards was produced there about 10 years ago by a brother who lived in Ireland at the time, but who now actually lives down in from the south of England somewhere. But they were produced in Ireland, fair enough, but they're not Irish boards. They are a modern version of Lewis in many ways, just slightly more artistic. But that's just one of the differences between us. We treat degree given to our candidates slightly different in how we approach it than how you do. And of course, that all goes back to the same fact that you guys, when you have your altar actually is on the master's table. Our altar is the main item in our lodge room. And
absolutely,
without going too far, it plays a key part in everything that we do.
Thank you, Brother Hugh. Thank you, Brother Bob. Brother Hasu, you raised your hand, so you can unmute. Probably he left. So floor is open for comments and questions, and please use the chat box or raise your hand.
I can fully understand, Dimitrios, why it would take a minute or two for people to couch their or draft their question. There was quite a lot to take in a very short space of time there, and there is a wealth of material still to be brought to the table in the months and years ahead, because for a long time, the activities of Freemasonry in Ireland have been overlooked, and it's only really in the last 20 years that we are beginning to expose and bring forward a lot of the fascinating items and materials that still exist in our old lodge rooms around the country. And it's a long process getting around and getting visiting and photographing and getting permission to use and present the stories associated with them. There's quite a lot of work there. I mean, one of the famous ones, 1743 in Youghal, was the talk of the two excellent masons carrying the arch and the parade to church. We have subsequently found 3 surviving old tin arches, which are probably 4 foot wide, 2 foot high, with the various symbols of Royal Arch Masonry suspended under. Some of them in very poor condition because of their age, but nonetheless, they would suggest that what was carried in Youghal was actually a physical arch. And as we know that there are 1 or 2 examples still out there. So there's a long way to go in the story of the history of Ireland. I've only whet your interest here this evening, and I hope that we can continue and develop and present the story of Ireland in the years ahead.
There is a question or remark by Brother Michael Monroe. Brother Michael, you have to unmute yourself, and please.
In England and in Scotland, we tend to argue about who has the longest pedigree or the best pedigree for speculative Freemasonry. Do you have your own views as to Ireland's position over this argument, or do you have your own idea about where it really started?
I certainly do have, Michael. I mean, there is no doubt that whenever you go back into our history and you look at Ireland, England, and Scotland, there was a very big interchange of ideas between all 3 parts of the British Isles at that period in history. Where we in Ireland differ from Scotland and England is that our Freemasonry tended to come from the bottom up. They were working class lodges by and large. We refer to the Lady Freemason, and her father ended up as Grand Master of the Lodge, or Grand Master of the Order at one point. But it's an interesting area. Scotland has a great history going back. If you go to some of the old Scottish lodges, you're looking at 1590, 1600. But really, when you look at the content of the material that they have, and you look, of course, at some of the other items in that period of history, what you're really looking at is trade union documents rather than Masonic lodges. There are no references to ritual or anything like that. Now, interestingly enough, in Ireland, we would have looked at our foundation history, our foundation ritual. You have the Chetwood Crawley manuscript in front of you, which discusses 3-degree working in 1717. There's a lot of very interesting and suggestive material there. But unfortunately, in Ireland, we very much took to heart the declaration that you don't write down or record any items of Masonic interest. And what you get in the earliest of the minute books are very, very minimal presentations. Lodge opened, lodge closed, Brother Bashford got a degree. Doesn't even tell you in most cases what the degree is. It was just the way Freemasonry had been promoted at that time. But the interesting area is the whole church service thing, the whole St. John's Day. St. John's Day was a much more powerful date in Ireland, and indeed still is, because in Ireland, our lodge installations occur after St. John's Day. England and Scotland are totally random. You could be installing people in January, February, March, April, May, June. They don't seem to tie back, appreciate, and understand their history. This is one of the difficulties. We do tend to still work around the John's Days, and they are still seen as a very important part of Irish Freemasonry, but that doesn't seem to be the case elsewhere, sadly. Having said that, Michael, of course, we all have our own ideas. I'm not saying that your thoughts are wrong or my thoughts are right. Part of the whole joy of Freemasonry in the historical side is the interchange of ideas between people and learn a wee bit more about what we do and what you do and see where it all takes us.
I think that the Irish have been left out of the argument between England and Scotland. I feel that perhaps there's an element of truth in what you say, that maybe the Irish predate England and Scotland, but there we are. We have no proof.
One interesting thing, Michael, which will amuse you, if you've ever visited an Irish lodge, I don't know, are you based in the centre of England?
I'm in just outside Paris.
Oh, that's even better then. Outside Paris, if you look, for example, one of the fascinating things about French Freemasonry, if you go and look at some of the ritual work there, it's one of the very few places that you can still see moderns working in place. And you'll laugh when I tell you where it is. It's in the Grand Orient. So the moderns had a bigger spread than they thought. But it's a fascinating area, and we in Ireland would tend to be we would be less flurry. We didn't have the advantage of Sussex polishing our ritual. Our ritual still goes back to the early days and is still quite sharp and to the point. England wouldn't quite be so sharp now. As you march around with a good stepping around the floor and what have you, it's a slightly different type of Freemasonry than what we have in Ireland. And of course, we're lucky. We have Glittering Star 322 and 295 St. Patrick's over as missionaries there in England, trying to teach you the right way of doing ritual in the Irish way.
Brother Friedrich, please.
Dear brethren, excuse me, my name is Friedrich Friedrich.
Okay,
Okay.
okay, sorry.
I'm coming from a small and far country, from Hungary, East Middle European small obedience. We have a few hundred of members. Congratulations to this excellent presentation, which is completely unknown in Eastern Europe. The only thing I would like to ask you, how is the situation to the other big obedience to the Scottish obedience from Scotland? As it for us, we heard just about the history of the English Freemasonry and not at all about your obedience. That's why I'd like to thank you again this presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Frederick. I'm delighted you could be with us this evening, and I hope that you found some items of interest. We are similar in some ways to the English and Scottish, but in other ways we're very different. And that's what makes Ireland unique.
Thank you, Brother Frederick, and thank you, Brother Bob. Brother Tony, nice to see you. And you please unmute yourself and make your comment.
First, Bob, thank you very much for an excellent presentation. And I've seen parts of that on your postings on Facebook. And also I've got to thank you for a mention of Glittering Star Lodge 322, which does travel around England, as you know. And in the 30 years I've been secretary of it, I was counting them up. We've had 20,000 visitors to the lodge, which is a phenomenal number of people to come to our meetings, where we attempt to work the Irish ritual as well as we possibly can. I know you've seen one of the instances and soon to see another. But one of the things in your presentation, you showed many floor cloths and things which had a mention of the Knight Templar on there. A particular interest of mine, because I'm also a member of the Knight Templar Order in England, but I'm fascinated with the fact that Glittering Star has been accredited of taking the Knight Templar degrees to both the America, Boston, and to Canada, Halifax, Nova Scotia, in the mid-60s, 1760s. And Glittering Star got its warrant in 1759 in Ireland, when the 29th Foot were there. They never returned to England after they formed the lodge. They went straight to the Americas. So one can assume, and I can find no evidence, that all the degrees they conferred whilst they were in the Americas were in fact obtained by them in Ireland. Have you got any further information than that, Bob?
All I can really tell you, Tony, in the 18th century in Ireland, the way the degrees spread, and it was quite a curious system. If you found a brother in a local lodge who had received a particular degree, whether it's Royal Arch or High Knight Templar, you would have went along to his lodge and you would have paid your 3 shillings or 6 shillings or whatever it was, and you would have got the degree. And you would have learned the degree and you would have then brought it back to your lodge, and it would have been distributed that way through the members of your lodge who wanted to get it. Now, it goes back to something I said earlier. The main thing to remember is that up until 1830, the only legal document issued by the Grand Lodge of Ireland was your blue or craft warrant. And many, many different degrees were worked under the blue or craft warrant up until 1830. And from then forward, other bodies were formed and what have you. But the period you're talking about, I would think what happened you guys were a military lodge. You were in some of the army bases at the time, whether it was Athlone, Cork, Dublin, or Belfast. And whilst there, some of your men would have been in receipt of early Grand Encampment working, High Knight Templar working, Royal Arch Chapter working. And that would spread eventually through your lodge membership. You would then go away off to Canada, America, Australia, or wherever you're going, and you would use those new degrees as part and parcel of your meetings. Now, one of the big things in Ireland is what they talked about was the quarterly meetings. And the quarterly meetings followed the full moon. So on the quarterly meeting night, you would have had your ordinary craft meeting, and then any other degrees that were going to be worked would have been worked on the quarterly meetings whenever the moon was out. So you could have stayed later in your lodge room, and you'd have had moonlight to go back to your homes or whatever, your base. And that is how a lot of the degrees spread at that particular time. Arc, Lincoln, Wrestle, Excellent Mason, Super Excellent Mason, Royal Arch Chapter, Knight Templar, Knights of Malta, those degrees would have all have been given to one or two of your members in another lodge room, and they would have then taken them back and worked them. And that's how it spread. And interesting enough, one of our earlier brethren there was from Scotland. That's how early Grand Encampment, Knight Templar and Knights of Malta got into the west coast of Scotland, was through the Scottish regiments, going back to their home bases and introducing it there. And it's a fascinating area. The whole question of the spread of Masonic ritual around the globe depends so much on Irish and Grand Lodge of the Ancients warrants that were attached to military regiments that were sent to project the British viewpoint on a worldwide basis.
Thanks very much, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. There are two questions from the chat. The first one is from Jan Snuk question, and the question is, where can I find the picture with the 6 stars plus a comet, and from when was that?
It's from 1817, and it is the great comet that was over the north of Ireland for 6 months in that particular year. And it is specifically a question of a part of society, not apart from society, where the painter looked out his window and he saw the comet and he turned one of the stars into a comet.
Okay.
I imagine you'll be putting up the PowerPoint, so Jan will be able to look at the PowerPoint. Or if he wants to drop me an email, I'll send him a couple of copies of it.
Okay, I hope Brother Jan Snuk has your email, and
I think he has somewhere in the
directly
in the bowels.
Oh, Brother Bob, you disappeared.
Yes.
Yeah.
I seem to have one offline there. Oh, how strange. Bear with me.
We can hear you, but okay.
Yes, that should be me now.
Okay, that's okay. There is another question by Brother Fred Vogt. Is the Red Branch of Erie a degree originally from Ireland? If yes, can you explain its origin?
It was worked by some Irish constitution brethren. It was also worked, I believe, in the east of England at one point. But it isn't really, well, arguably it was one of the side degrees in Ireland which bit the dust whenever they set up the Grand Council of Degrees by Fowler and Lord Donaghmore, or the Duke of Leinster. And at that time it bit the dust. But we hear mention of the Red Branch every now and again, but it isn't really, it wouldn't be one of the main Irish degrees. It was there in the background somewhere, worked by a few lodges, but that wouldn't be any more than that. I'm trying to think, was it was it Foster? There was one guy had written about it a few years ago, but again, he didn't find much meat in the bone about it.
Okay. I mentioned that in some artifacts there is also exist a bridge. Of course, yes. Could you please comment? Thank you.
We in Ireland are very practical people, and whenever we looked at the Royal Arch workings, we decided that we were going to repair the existing temple. We weren't going to waste all that money and build a new temple. We were going to repair the existing temple in the time of Josiah. And our Royal Arch degree is all around the Josiah working at that period. Other constitutions viewed it slightly differently, and instead of repairing the temple, they had a lot more money knocking about. They were clearly getting money out of Threadneedle Street or wherever, and they decided they were going to build a new temple. And they operated under Zerubbabel. And Zerubbabel, as you know, had been in Babylon and all the entire story there. And they formed the Royal Arch chapter on that basis. We in Ireland had looked at the Zerubbabel legend, and there were some lessons within the ritual in it that we found attractive. And at one stage, we had a group of degrees known as the Red Cross degrees. And the Red Cross degrees, as you referred to earlier, had the bridge. And they eventually had Zerubbabel in there as well. And they found a home for probably 100 years in the 19th century under Great Prairie, which was a very strange home for them because Great Prairie, as you know, is a Christian organization, and poor old Zerubbabel wasn't really a Christian in those days. So what happened was that in the 1880s, 1890s, there was a lot of discussion took place in the senior levels of Great Prairie, and eventually it came forward in the late teens of the 20th century. They were going to look and see what they were going to do. And eventually in 1923, the Grand Council of Knight Masons was formed to deal with what had originally been the Red Cross degrees, including the crossing of the bridge in the Jordan and all that side of it. And that eventually became the Grand Council. And there are a number of senior Grand Council officers on this video tonight that know a lot more about it than I do, but they would tell you that they will be celebrating their 100th anniversary in 2023, when there'll be much excitement in the wilds of Dublin, I would imagine, and all kinds of history will be put forward on that occasion.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bob.
And would that be the Grand East of Greece now, speaking in the Grand Council?
Don't answer that question, Dimitrios.
Thank you, Tony. It's another question from Brother Dimitrios Papageorgiou. Hello from Corfu Island, Greece. Since 1732, when the first traveling military lodge was founded under the aegis of the Grand Lodge of Ireland in the 1st Foot Regiment, the Royal Regiment of the British forces, there was a common practice, particularly of the Irish Masons, to set up lodges, chapter, and encampments within military units. What do we know of these lodges during the British occupation 1815 till 1864 in Corfu Islands? This was a question about the presentation, about the British occupation and the traveling lodges from Ireland to Corfu.
All I can tell both you, Dimitrios, and the other Dimitrios, I have done some research into the traveling military warrants, and one area which I haven't seen very much surviving material has been Corfu. Now, there are many reasons for that. We have instances in the past, whenever our military lodge attached to its regiment takes off somewhere, it gets into all kinds of difficulties. They're fighting soldiers at the end of the day, and they're involved in the various battles and struggles of the day. And occasionally, quite a number of them get wiped out, and there are very few people left to record what has happened or what's going on. The other side of the coin, of course, which is equally valid, is that in those days, most of the transport was done by ship. And ships in the 1815, 1850, 1860 period were not the most reliable form of transport you could have. And quite a lot of the British military personnel lost their baggage trains on the ships going to or from wherever they happened to be based. I know this was a common problem, for example, in the Caribbean, where a number of our military lodges for short periods of time lost their records and had to go back to Dublin for new warrants and what have you. So unfortunately, Corfu is not an area I know very much about, and I can only apologize to Dimitrios for that. But any records that they do have that would be held would be with Rebecca down in Mulder Street in Dublin. And I'll have a wee word with her and see what I can find out on that and come back maybe to you, Dimitrios, and you can pass it on to your brother in Corfu.
Thank you very much, Brother Bob. Any questions? Any more questions? No. So I would like to thank you all for your patience to be with us tonight. I wish you all the best for next week and next month, because next month we will have the next lecture, number 22. And many thanks for Brother Robert Bashford for his excellent presentation about the early history on Grand Lodge of Ireland and this fascinating lecture. Thank you very much. Good night and stay safe.